Right, good morning all. My name's David Gorn. I'm representing the West Midlands Combined Authority today. I think on the call I've got myself and a colleague from DWP, Richard Smith.
Morning. Hi, David.
Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Great to have you along. So today, appreciate this is the Combined Authority's first webinar and sessions out to organisations who are potentially going to be either a gateway or a supporting organisation, or those organisations who may have an interest in supporting Kickstart and the Kickstart programme, and also the young people around who are going to be participating on this programme. Initially, everybody on the call today are organisations who are either currently a registered gateway through DWP, also organisations who have a contractual relationship with the Combined Authority, other member organisations such as local authorities, local chambers, LEPs, and other networks who are associated with the Combined Authority. We haven't actively promoted this event any wider than that, for the main reason that Kickstart is still very much in its infancy, and I appreciate that there's a lot of policy intent which is still to be designed and developed from DWP, alongside the West Midlands Combined Authority's strategy as a coordinator of Kickstart activity across the region. So if I can just move us to some housekeeping and how this kind of event will run for the next 2 hours, because I wanted to make sure that we can make the best use of the 2 hours available to us. But if you can keep your microphone on mute, that'd be really helpful. We are anticipating that there's going to be around 100 attendees on this webinar, so that means it's going to be quite difficult for me to identify who's asking questions. So if you can raise your hand, or the virtual hand, I'll be able to call upon you. And if I do call upon you to ask your question, present your question, if you could keep it as succinct as possible, but if you could also just let us know who you are and the organisation you're representing as well, that would be really, really helpful. The chat function will be active, so please feel free to comment and ask questions as we go along. There will be obviously time at the end to ask more questions through a question and answer session, but please do use the comment section, and both myself as host and my colleague Jess, who's helping me in the background, will pick up any questions as we go to be covered a little bit later in the session. This session is actually being recorded, so please be mindful of that. Main reason that we're going to record it is so that we can keep it share it later potentially on YouTube. So please be aware that we are recording this, so that keep it yours so you know that. And if you're uncomfortable about it being recorded and your views being out in ether, then please be mindful of that. Okay, I'll move on to the agenda now, and what we're wanting to cover today, and some of the key points. So firstly, I've obviously done a very quick welcome and introduction. I am going to cover some background in terms of what's actually happening in the Combined Authority area, in terms of the impacts of COVID. The DWP, I'm going to hand over to Richard, and Richard's going to give us a bit of an insight into where things are at currently from a DWP perspective. For those of you who are a little bit less knowledgeable on Kickstart, there will be some background information on there, but I don't want to tend to dwell on that too much. I want us to move into the sort of nitty-gritties in terms of then what's actually happening on the ground, where we're at, and the impact to young people. And then I'll move on to, from a Combined Authority perspective, what we're currently thinking about, certainly in terms of what good looks like at present. And again, as Kickstart and its policy continues to evolve, and as more information comes out, I expect that what good looks like will continue to change as well, as everybody seeks to improve their offer both to people on the programme. I'm also going to touch on the addressable market, and I think something which you're probably all of you be very mindful of is current situation in terms of lockdown, and the term about COVID resilience and those COVID resilient sectors, what we need to be thinking about. And then the final element in terms of what we're thinking about is about capacity building, collaboration, and how we'll make the best of, or how we want to make the best of the Kickstart programme for the West Midlands. Then we'll talk about Q&A. All of you then have the opportunity to ask questions. And then finally, in terms of closing up through next steps and a potential evaluation piece, which we are wanting to embark upon. So if I move us into the background, and I won't dwell on this section for too long because I'm appreciative that Richard's already got a lot of this detail within his slide deck, but we know that the opportunity is significant for young people. Some of what I'm going to be covering a little bit later is quite stark in terms of the amount of young people have been impacted on by COVID, and certainly in terms of the growth in UC numbers, which are significant to say the least. We are obviously very mindful that government are putting hands in the pockets to the tune of £2 billion to support as many young people as possible into Kickstart by paying the wages, cover the wages during a 6-month program. And around that, there's additional support in terms of the wraparound support to provide individuals with those employability skills to help them either stick with that employer or potentially progress elsewhere. And I will talk about progression a little bit later, because I think there's a key element about Kickstart is that the Kickstart program isn't just a 6-month program, it's about what happens afterwards and how we plan for that young person's journey after Kickstart, be it into apprenticeship or into employment elsewhere or with that current host employer. We're also going to be talking a little bit about those larger based employers who will be directly accessing the services of DWP, and also those employers who will be accessing the services of a gateway organisation. Obviously we're now using the terminology of gateway as opposed to intermediary. For those of you who are sharp will notice that there's a bit of a typo there in that slide. So moving on, I just want to talk about really the opportunity and what the opportunity really provides us in the West Midlands Combined Authority area. So clearly a tremendous opportunity to help as many young people as possible, aged between the ages of 16 to 24, to provide them with some very meaningful work experience and work activity to enable them then to progress. There's a key opportunity for us to support businesses during recovery. So the impact of COVID, we know, has been significant on many businesses. This provides them an opportunity to think about new positions, because obviously Kickstart is aligned to new jobs, not replacement jobs, but enables them to support some form of growth. And then finally, there's an element of building in a positive approach of employing young people in the region. We know that youth unemployment remains stubbornly high in the West Midlands region, even before COVID. So it gives us an opportunity to accelerate recharge activities to support young people to enable them to progress. Moving on, I think one of the other elements is about COVID and how has COVID actually impacted on the region. And as we know, young people are the most affected target group of young people. We already know that there's high levels of unemployment amongst this group, and particularly high levels of unemployment amongst the BME groups, and that's continued. And if anything, COVID has obviously added to that burden, especially to those groups who are disadvantaged. I think the other element where we've got another impact of COVID, we already had an over concentration of individuals in low wage jobs and insecure jobs. COVID is going to impact on that again, and it's likely that we're going to have more individuals and more younger people in low wage paid jobs and less secure employment. So significant impact there on issues which we already had within the region. And then finally, we knew that our levels of qualifications were relatively low anyway. So in terms of our own competitiveness with the rest of the UK, skills and qualifications at level 4 were already basically individuals who were qualified at level 4 in the region were at 32% compared to a national average of 39%. So the impact of COVID again will expose that issue around lower level skills within the Combined Authority district, when we need businesses to rebound and respond, and to respond and bounce back quickly. Skills could be a potential issue for us. So COVID has not been particularly helpful, obviously, for the UK, but has and continues to expose some of those weaknesses which we already had within the West Midlands. As you can see on this slide, we've talked about, we can show here the claimant count, and you can see how the claimant count has accelerated amongst 16 to 64-year-olds over the period. So generally what we've moved from a total of well, we're now at a position where we've got 173,000 individuals who are, this is based on September, who are claiming UC, and that's gone up from around about 90, that's gone up, well, it's actually pretty much doubled in terms of the actual figure. So the unemployment rate among 16 to 64-year-olds has increased rapidly. And that is the same across all the LEP areas. So for instance, for Birmingham, that's moved from 35,780 to 66,960. And the numbers just continue to rise and rise and rise. Moving on to UC and young people. The young people claimant count again has increased significantly. It's pretty much doubled. And where we're at currently now, and we've now got the October figures, and this is obviously reporting for September, but we've got roughly around about 46,000 young people who are in receipt of UC, and that's off the back of what the numbers were back in January, which were around about 21,245. So again, you can see the acceleration of UC claimants amongst young people, and that's pretty much doubled. So a significant number of young people impacted via COVID, which again shows the need why we need a programme to work such as Kickstart to help respond to those young people. In terms of the COVID job retention scheme, known as furlough, in the region, just move on to the next slide. In the region, we know that we've currently got that West Midlands has got the highest take-up rate nationally in terms of furlough amongst businesses, and at present we've got, or we did have, 866,000 individuals who are registered on the furlough scheme. So that is significant. And what we've found that in the main, the highest percentage of furlough workers are in the sectors of business and professional and financial services, closely followed by those individuals who are in retail and the cultural economies, including sports. These figures were based on pre-October, so appreciate with the extension of lockdown, with introduction of lockdown 2 and the extension of furlough, some of these numbers will be a little bit volatile and will have changed, because there will be groups of individuals who've potentially fallen through the gap between furlough and the extension of furlough. But we do expect some form of variation, but generally just goes to show the level of numbers who are potentially furloughed within the West Midlands, which we just need to be mindful of in terms of our strategies going forward in terms of how we engage employers. Just to the next slide in terms of our angle and why the combined authorities is going to play the role of coordinator in terms of Kickstart. There is obviously the significant number of young people means that we've got to do a lot of work on the ground, and we need to ensure that we coordinate activity, ensure that we've got sufficient capacity and capability for those gateway organisations, but also ensure that the coordination and the front end support for young people who are on UC, that they can neatly move and progress forward into gateways so that they can actually participate on the programme. So there's a lot of work required around that. So there's a big piece of work in terms of how we deliver consistent messaging to both young people, employers, it's gateways, but also then how we provide confidence in the system and the confidence amongst gateway organisations and the quality of their offer to provide confidence to employers, and how we can actually keep an eye on the elements of progression so that young people just don't join a Kickstart programme, they actually progress and move into sustainable employment, be that through an apprenticeship or be that through employment with the Kickstart host or another employer. How we collaborate effectively between all the intermediaries and organisations across the piece. So we know there's lots of organisations who've all got an important role to play in Kickstart. So from a local authority perspective, through a National Career Service perspective, from a DWP perspective, our perspective, all providers have all got a role to play in that, and obviously member representatives such as the chambers, SSB, CBI, IOD, and it's how we collaborate and bring all of that coordination to the fore so that we can make the best of this opportunity. And then finally, there's an element about the sectoral coverage and geographic coverage. We want to ensure that no district is left behind and that no sector is left behind, and that we've got an offer to support the geographies, sectors, but also young people in the whole range of different communities where they come from. A key target which we're looking at and working with DWP on is that we see that there is the potential for 20,000 Kickstart placements across West Midlands. That roughly equates to an investment of about 120 million. So that investment is significant, and we want to leverage the most of that to support our residents in the region. And as we know, Kickstart is now live and active, but with lockdown, we appreciate that's impacted on some of our activity, and certainly I appreciate some of the activity on you as gateway organisations. So we're mindful of that, but we need to start to put together a coherent plan, really, in terms of what our strategy will look like going forward. So I'm going to move us on now to, well, after me setting the scene, I'm now going to move us on to Richard Smith, who's going to talk about the journey so far.
Okay, thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Smith. I'm presently the Group Partnership Manager for West Midlands region. I can see there's a good number of participants, 94 at the moment, and I have had a look through the list of participants, and it's good to see that in the time-honoured tradition, a lot of DWP workforce gets recycled, myself included. So hello to quite a few people who I've known from my dim and distant past on that list. Look forward to working with you in the future. You know who you are, and I hope I haven't upset you in a previous life. Anyway, okay, moving on. So Kickstart then. I can honestly say in my 39 years in this department, I haven't come across a programme that has been conceived, rolled out, launched in the time that this one has. I think for that reason, it's given us in DWP some significant challenges in making that happen. I'm sure that all of you on the call today will know that it was only launched in July by the Chancellor. It was announced during just as we were coming out of lockdown, as a response really to what was happening, which was then perceived to be the end of the furlough period, and to address some of the issues for young people in terms of moving them closer to work. So I'll talk through the sort of bullet points I've got there, because some of these are more important than others. So obviously, programme aimed at 16 to 24-year-olds who may be at risk of long-term unemployment. I think that's important for a number of reasons. When we talk about people who are at risk of long-term unemployment, we have to think about the customers that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in the job centre. Some of these young people may not be able to help themselves to other jobs in other sectors. They may have come from a sector that's really struggling at the moment with the current pandemic. Hospitality is one for a prime example of that. And so because of those issues, and potentially because of issues that they find themselves with, whether that be health, environment, peer pressure, home environment, that they may well be at risk of becoming long-term unemployed if we didn't intervene. Normally, we would have our programme of work experience. We'd have an opportunity for people to move into training and support. This is completely different. This is about young people having a fully funded work experience opportunity for a 6-month period of time, and they're guaranteed this 6-month work placement for 25 hours. For the Kickstart process, and they'll also have employability support. I'll talk about.
Does it have to be a receipt of university credit? Wahid, to come on the Kickstart program?
Could you all just go on mute for me, please? Thank you. So they're guaranteed the employability support. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Just to back up what David said a little bit earlier about the impact of that young people have felt in the West Midlands, and these figures are pretty stark, to be honest. Currently, we've got, as David said, just under 45,000 young people claiming universal credit. If I look at the pre-pandemic figure, so we use March's figure for that because it had been pretty stable for some time. That was 23, just under 24,000. So we've had a 90% increase in young people. But I think what's most relevant for this is the fact that young people who've been unemployed for between 6 and 12 months have been particularly badly impacted by this. So at present, that figure is for the West Midlands is just under 12,800, and that's up from 5,500 in March. So 200+% impacted from a 6 months plus point of view. So already in the system, we have people who have been impacted pretty heavily by this. So there will be a significant number of people who are facing long-term unemployment already. And so for some people, I would imagine Kickstart can't come soon enough for them. So our Job Centre Plus work coaches, they're responsible for working with the young people and deciding who's best to go into this, and who are our young people who can help themselves into work, because those people aren't necessarily the right people for the Kickstart programme. And so what we would look to be doing is to be working very closely with you, either as employers or gateway organisations, to really make sure that we get the right people for these Kickstart opportunities. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of how it works, I don't want to bore everybody with this detail, because I think a lot of this is already out there, but I think it's worth just touching on some of this. And so there are two distinct elements to all of this. So if you're an organisation who can provide 30+ new job placements by the end of the programme, you can apply to join the scheme in your own right. Where I think the West Midlands is going to play a significant role in all of this is as gateway organisations coming on board to support SMEs, smaller employers who have under 30 job placements within the life of the programme, but would welcome the support of a gateway organisation to administer that help and support for them. And we've got evidence about a lot of that work going on already. I'm sure David will talk about this a little bit later from the combined authorities point of view. Most of our local authorities are working towards becoming gateway organisations. Large representative employer organisations are doing the same. Colleges and training providers such as yourselves are all coming together to offer this help and support, because I think it's really important that organisations like training associations, training organisations come together to bring the employer links that you've got. And I think we have to recognise that, you know, DWP can't do all this on their own, and you have some really good tangible employer links out there, and employers that may want to play a significant part in all of this. So all of these jobs that people that our employers out there bring to bear have to be new jobs. They have to be additional jobs. They cannot be jobs that where a redundancy has taken place against them. They can't be jobs where furlough has been placed against these individuals. So nobody should have lost a job prior to this happening. And there's quite a significant spotlight check that DWP do on all of those employers who you as gateway organisations will be working with. So not only do you have a spotlight check on yourself, but all the organisations or employers that you'll be working with in the time frame of Kickstart will all be everybody will go through this check to make sure that they tick the right boxes. £1,500 is paid to the employer to cover setup costs and employability. I'm not going to go into any massive detail about employability and setup costs. Suffice to say that employability is largely about preparing the young person for the world of work beyond Kickstart. So it's what you will do as a gateway organisation or an employer to support the young person to become more employable after their Kickstart experience. And obviously, if there's going to be skills brought to bear as a result of that, then that's what you'll need to state in the application. So if there's some skills activity being delivered as part of your offer, then you'd need to state that in your application. There's no actual hard and fast examples that I can give you about what that might look like. Suffice to say, it's preparing the young person for the world of work. And gateway organisations receive another £300 on top of that to ensure that you're given the financial recompense for actually administering all of this in the first place. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. We've covered. I think we've covered this off in some detail now. I think the 6-month unemployment issue is significant for us, particularly in the West Midlands. If I look at the 3 districts that make up the West Midlands, in addition to those, people who've been unemployed, people who are currently unemployed in that space at the moment for young people 16 to 24s, just under 18,000 in Birmingham and Solihull, just under 14,000 in the Black Country, and just under 13,800 in Mercia. The 6 to 12 month figure, over 5,000 now in Birmingham and Solihull, 4,000 in Black Country, and 3,800 in Mercia make up those numbers. So again, you know, just to emphasise how stark that is for us at the moment. Okay, next slide. So where does Kickstart fit into our agenda? As I'm sure you'll probably recognise, as a result of COVID, what's happened is we've had to look again hard and fast at our offer of programme and provision support, and young people are a key factor in all of this. So our sector-based work academy programmes, our SWAPs, are an integral part of the offer to young people. SWAPs are really about the current vacancies that are in the labour market. So they are vacancies that would be there anyway, because the employer would be recruiting as part and parcel of normal business. And obviously the sectors there that where we're recruiting heavily at the moment, particularly retail, food distribution, warehousing, particularly around food distribution, is relevant to all of that. So there are sectors that are still increasing their spread and their vacancy stock, and we will work with those as we have done in the past to offer young people the opportunity to bring their skills up to date to enable them to compete for those jobs that are there. We've got a couple of other programs that young people are also participating in. Job entry targeted support for people who are 3 to 6 months unemployed, and our job finder support, essentially about help and support for newly unemployed people. Both of those programs are not just about 18 to 24s, they're about support for everybody that's out there, and they are helping people in terms of finding jobs in this new virtual world. We're obviously having to tailor the support for delivery with our providers, because most of it at the moment, because of lockdown, is being delivered digitally. That may change in the fullness of time as more provision becomes available and lockdown changes. And that's the other reason why we've also created youth hubs and taken on youth work coaches. Most youth hubs offer an opportunity for young people to engage with us in a different way outside of job centres. And certainly prior to lockdown 2, we'd started to open our doors for youth hubs, which had been set up within local authority networks, within providers that we currently work with right across the West Midlands. But we have youth hubs developing as we speak now. The idea being it gives a young person a port of call to enable them to engage with youth work coaches outside of the normal job centre environment. And we think that's really important. Not everybody engages in the best possible way through job centres. We recognise that. And so the youth hub approach will enable us to move our work forward in conjunction with significant numbers of providers and employers who will come together in this hub environment to make that work for us. Clearly, at the moment, we can't do that on a face-to-face basis. And so what we're doing through the Youth Hub network is making sure that we've got that digital offer to young people. So Kickstart supports all of that by moving people into jobs. It enables, and through the Youth Hub approach, what we envisage happening is our gateway organisations, our employers will come together within those hubs to allow that face-to-face discussion with employers and gateway organisations to really make that a tangible supporting structure for our young people. Okay, next slide. Thank you very much. Okay, so where are we at the moment then? What happened from the Chancellor's launch in July is that interested employers and gateway organisations were asked to, if you like, express their interest in becoming part and parcel of all of this. Hopefully, most of you on the call will probably have seen the gov.uk website details on all of this. There's quite a lot of detail there now on Kickstart. It's becoming far more comprehensive in terms of its information. I have to say that it's been a very big learning experience for us in DWP from an operational point of view, because me and my team are experiencing, big numbers of inquiries from organisations who are applying to become gateways, applying to become employers with all of this. And what we've got now from the 2nd of November is that also becoming operational. And so the gateway organisations are dropping new vacancies onto the system, but we are still working with organisations such as yourselves to make sure that you make the best possible fist of that gateway application, and that we can work closely with you to make those job opportunities real for young people. So at the moment, we've got somewhere in the region of, just under 199 organisations who are interested in becoming gateways. So those organisations in the West Midlands are currently in the process of applying to become gateways. The stock of employers is something that sits outside of all of that. So these are the employers that DWP work with on a day-to-day basis. And so we've got somewhere in the region of 867, it says there, employers who have expressed an interest in becoming an employer and offering a gateway opportunity. Most of those are SMEs, and on the gov.co website, what they will be now doing is aligning themselves with some of the gateway organisations that are already on there. Most of our local authorities have made an application approach to DWP. Those gateway organisations are now also bringing somewhere in the region of a similar sort of figure there. So just under 900 have been committed by local authorities. We've got other organisations who are applying to become gateways, such as chambers of commerce, and we've actually started the process now. So it went live on the 2nd of November, and we've got over 2,000 referrals that have been made by work coaches to the jobs that are now available. Next slide. Thank you. So at the moment, those are the sort of organisations and sectors that are placing vacancies through Kickstart. So, and it's quite nice to see that we've got a particularly wide spread of sectors that are catered for there. I think that the concern in the initial stages was that because most national employers were starting to place vacancies, a lot of that was about retail. You may have seen on the news, Tesco's were one of the first organisations to put their head above the parapet. Most of the Tesco young people will be starting this week on the 18th of November. That's on a national basis, so we'll probably see some headlines around what's happening there. But you can see there, we have got a really good spread of sectors, and that's important to us, because what we want to be able to do in job centres is to give young people an opportunity to move into sectors perhaps that they wouldn't have ordinarily considered, sectors that are brand new to them, sectors that may be of interest to them because they've been displaced from a sector that's been particularly hit by COVID. So that's really, really important. I think one of the things that sort of lessons learnt along the way with all of this, and David used an expression about becoming COVID resilient, and I think we've seen some issues already where employers who've been impacted already by the second wave of lockdown, where we've already started people in jobs, and we've had to hold back on some of those. And as an organisation, DWP has gone back to those employers who've already expressed interest in placing vacancies during November and December, and asked the question about, you know, how does the current lockdown situation impact you in placing this vacancy on Kickstart? So for that reason, it's been a little bit slower perhaps to move forward, but in some respects that's quite helpful, because from our perspective and our gateway organisation's perspective, it gives an opportunity to reflect on the quality behind all of that. To support our work locally, we've got a network. We've always had the network, I suppose, in the West Midlands of employer-facing teams, DWP colleagues that work with employers on a day-to-day basis. We've put some Kickstart employer leads into the mix within all of that, right across the 3 districts, but we are working now very closely with organisations as they begin to place their vacancies, because what we want to do is to make sure, A, we're getting the right people to these companies. We want to make sure that young people are supported through the lifetime of Kickstart, and of course we want to make sure that we continue to have the stock of vacancies that are going to give these many unemployed young people the best opportunity for this longer period of work experience that's paid during the lifetime of Kickstart. So I hope that's helpful. We are in this very agile world at the moment where we're getting a lot of questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions on how we're progressing this at the moment. Some of the questions will be answered as a result of your application through to the gateway process with DWP. We're starting to pick up some of the answers to questions as a result of gateway organisations coming across hurdles with DWP along the way, because all of this isn't dealt with by me or my team. This is dealt with by DWP nationally. So we have nothing at all, unfortunately, from a West Midlands point of view, in terms of how the gateways are sifted and how your application is administered. That's a completely separate team. But nevertheless, we are able to deal with some of the questions that have cropped up over the last 6 to 8 weeks on Kickstart, and we'll continue to do that. And my sort of offer to you from from a West Mids DWP point of view is, you know, we'll continue to support you in your in your progress towards becoming a gateway organisation. And obviously we're really keen on working with you and the employers that you bring with you as a gateway to make this happen for young people. I hope that's helpful. And I've probably given you food for thought, but you've probably got masses of questions running through your heads at the moment. I'm also interested to understand, you know, from some of you about where you might be with your gateway applications. We've had lots of questions that have come our way that we've passed up the line and maybe got answers to. But I'm hoping now that we've got a structure set up right across the West Midlands in the 3 districts that we can mirror that, and you'll have a contact within the district that you operate in. So I hope that's I hope in the fullness of time that will be really helpful for you. Back to you, David.
Thanks, Richard. That's been really helpful input. And I think the numbers there again are quite stark, and certainly in terms of those individuals who have, you know, are now 6 months unemployed, rising to 12,800 from 6,000. I mean, it's quite, that is significant. I think the other point as well, which you've made, which kind of neatly sort of falls into my next slide, is that ultimately we're preparing a young person to become more employable through the Kickstart programme. And certainly from a combined authority perspective, we've been thinking about what good looks like. And on the next slide, I've sort of set out what we think that from a combined authority perspective, what good looks like. And as with all these types of brand new programs, this will evolve, and we expect that it will evolve. And as good practice starts to be shared in terms of what gateways are finding, what employers are finding, in terms of how we can improve the provision of Kickstart and the offer, and to enable individuals to actually progress. But certainly from a combined authority perspective, we think it's really important to kind of break down the journey, and the journey for employers and for young people, and certainly in terms of from stage one. And I think in terms of that initial engagement, I think it's really important that really understand what it is the employers is actually looking for, and identifying those key elements, such as, is it a brand new job? It's not a replacement job, because I appreciate some applications may have failed on the back of it not being clearly defined that these are new jobs. So the initial engagement phase is really important certainly from either a large employer who are applying for more than 30 places, but also from a gateway organisation providing that service. As I said earlier, that conversation about progression is really important, and what is the end goal? What will actually happen for that individual while they're on the programme, and where do they actually move? Where do they move on to? Where do they move on to next? It's important to have that conversation up front with the employer in terms of that kick-starting off, I suppose, the conversation. Then there's an important element then about the onboarding piece in terms of kickstart onboarding. How we're setting expectations. So the expectations from an employer perspective of the young person while they're on that Kickstart program, and that the placement as such is structured. So there's a clear job description in there, but also an important element around induction, and that's quite clear in terms of that onboarding stage, but there's a structured induction that the young person can move into. I think it's also important that touch points are agreed. So the employers are aware during the program that there is going to be various touch points, you know, to ensure that as a gateway organisation you can tap into the young person, or if it's a large employer or an employer who's employing more than 30 Kickstart individuals, that there is some form of review process. So again, having those upfront conversations prior to the program commencing are really important, so the employer is clear in terms of what support they need to provide, but also that element about the organisation, the employer actually identifying their own areas where they potentially need support in terms of their own coaching and mentoring for how they host a Kickstart young person, because some of these employers may not have that experience. So we need to ensure that that's kind of identified. Moving forward then into the activation stage, really important that that wraparound has been agreed with the employer. So it's clear in terms of that wraparound support, which is going to support that young person be more employable going forward. The focus again on progression and how that young person actually develops their knowledge and skills during that placement. And maybe a good idea potentially around that would be some form of logbook or a portfolio, so the individual can gather their information, while their evidence, so to speak, while they're on their Kickstart program, to support that element of progression, so that if they can't secure employment with that current host employer, that they've got an evidence-based transferable skills which they can actually show and identify to any potential other employer. And in the final stage around progression, we'd expect that, what we'd hope is that conversations in terms of next steps are taken 8 weeks before the end of the placement. I think it's really important that the employer and the young person have got a good idea in terms of where they're at in terms of that end goal and what the next steps are, be that employment with the current employer or potentially an apprenticeship opportunity, or if there's not going to be a job, potentially where the individual can be supported to another option in terms of, be it an apprenticeship, traineeship, or swap program through another provider. And then finally, that element of sign-off and a sign-off reference for the young person, so they've got something tangible which demonstrates what they've actually developed, skills developed during that 6-month placement. So that just gives you an idea of what we've been looking at in terms of what good potentially would look like. And I appreciate many of you as gateway organisations, or those thinking about being gateway organisations, would have put some thought into that. In addition, those of you who've got access to AAB may be thinking about how could we use adult education budget to support those individuals on programme, because as many of you have probably noticed that there's a minimum duration of 25 hours. So potentially, what happens on the other day? So is it that the individual could be doing some pre-vocational, pre-apprenticeship type activity, or an occupationally specific qualification aligned to their placement to support that progression? So there are opportunities there for those organisations who've got levers and other funding streams which they can access to support the delivery. And certainly from a combined authority perspective, those AEB providers who are looking at Kickstart would be encouraging to be thinking about how they could use AEB support. I think the final element in terms of what good looks like and how we try and get the right balance then is between supply and demand, and then that progression, the supply of young people, and obviously the demand stimulated through employer activity. So moving on, another element we've been thinking about is the addressable market, and what the addressable market looks like in terms of employers. And as I've already mentioned about COVID resilience, but we've got 260,000 employers in the West Midlands. I appreciate these numbers are pre-COVID. So COVID resilience for some of these employers, that employer number may have dipped, certainly amongst some of the more micro businesses and those businesses in certain sectors, such as hospitality industry, retail industries, who have all been impacted by COVID. But the addressable market is still relatively high. And there's also those sectors where there is potential COVID resilience. So we already know that the warehousing, hospitality sector, the warehousing sector is currently continuing to grow and has shown resilience, obviously in terms of recruitment, alongside elements, certain pockets of the retail sector in terms of large supermarkets, and obviously, for instance, Tesco's are a major supporter of the Kickstart programme. So there are certain sectors which are more COVID resilient than others, and it's how we target our resource and our levers in targeting those businesses and those employers, but also not duplicating what's already out there. So not duplicating activity of our key stakeholders, such as the work of FSB, work of the chambers, work of the IOD in this space, but also the work on the ground in terms of local authorities and what they're doing in DWP. So we're keeping an eye on how can we actually influence the various member groups, various sectors in terms of how they can engage in Kickstart. But certainly from a gateway perspective, no doubt you'll be looking at your own addressable market through those employers you already have a relationship with, many of which will be probably looking to you to potentially to support their Kickstart journey. And then the final element on this slide in terms of sort of thing of thought is more around the sort of strategic aspects of this and capacity and collaboration, which is really important to us. And I've got that set out on the next slide. And in here, I think one of the key things for us to be thinking about is about how we actually identify the capacity amongst gateway organisations. and that's really important. That's part of today, is for us to reach out to you as organisations, those of you who are thinking about Kickstart, just for us to start to identify and get line of sight in terms of what it is you're potentially going to be offering and how potentially we can work together then on that. Another element in terms of our approach around capacity and collaboration is about some key performance indicators. And as Richard talked about earlier, he talked about some significant numbers, and it's how we sort of measure our impact. So our impact in terms of that stubborn group of stubborn number in terms of the quantum of 46,000 young people currently claiming UC, and that element of those young people currently over 12,000 who have been unemployed for more than 6 months. How do we measure our impact from a coordinated approach in terms of reducing that number? So that's quite a key piece of work, and that may move to milestones and some target setting for us as a region. As we talked already, we've got a high number in terms of a target for 20,000, but how do we get there? And that's an important point of our planning process. I also want to be in a position where we can share data and share data more, make data more accessible, both between ourselves and a DWP, but potentially for those organisations who want to work with us around Kickstart. But also be kind of working on that element of what the shop front looks like for young people. So how do young people actually access Kickstart, and how does that actually work? So we've got, as Richard outlined, we've got youth hubs, we've got the offer of NCS, we've got the work coaches, all working to the same goal of moving young people on. We want to make sure that all young people have got fair access to this opportunity. So that shop front is really important. And then obviously for you as gateways, what's going to be really important, and those organisations who potentially could be gateways, we're thinking about how can we move individuals through the process, through that element of being through the UC hub, and then through the work coach, and then into the actual job roles which have been created through Kickstart. So a lot of work needs to take place around that side. As I've talked about, addressable market, the employer engagement, how that actually takes place, and our role, certainly from West Midlands Combined Authority, we're looking at that. Certainly in terms of our indirect employer engagement through all those member organisations which I've just set out, you as gateways, but also about how we actually effectively collaborate. So a lot of work from the Combined Authorities perspective in terms of how we make the best of Kickstart as an opportunity for young people in the region and the employers has already taken place, but still needs to take place. This is very early days, and as Richard outlined, brand new programme, and the numbers are high, and currently we're in lockdown as well. So I'm not saying that we've got time, but we need to be certainly accelerating our activity to ensure that certainly going into next year that we've got a clear, coherent sort of plan and strategy in terms of how we're going to make the most of Kickstart for the region. I'm now going to move us on to the Q&A session, and we've got plenty of time, which is great, and I can see that the chat is already a buzz with different with a number of questions. But I have already received a question earlier this week from Fiona McGarry from Make UK. And Richard, this was just in relation to the question about application process and the potential delays in getting applications approved, and what actions are being taken to move that forward and for applications to be turned around at a more quicker pace.
Okay, so I tried to I alluded to this earlier in the sidebar, because somebody asked me a question about vacancies, and I did say there have been delays in the system. I hold my hands up here. The organisation was absolutely bombarded by applications from gateway organisations, and I think what we've had to do in the last 3 to 4 weeks is to increase the team that are looking at the applications significantly. I think where we are at the moment, we are getting through those within 2 weeks. Previously, it was 4. Apologies if you've got a gateway bid in the system at the moment. What I've been able to do for one or two organisations where they've put in a number of bids in the past, is to try and amalgamate all of those. What happens when you make an application? You're given a Kickstart number by DWP. That goes through a number of checks. One's a spotlight check to make sure that fiscally that you've got the wherewithal as an organisation to deal with it. You're then asked by DWP to detail the employers that you're working with and talk about the employability side of your work. But that process is speeding up now, David. But the offer is still there. If anybody on my team or through the district leads can offer any help and support, we'll do that. What we can't do is give any detail on where that bid is in terms of a yes or a no. We sit well outside of all of that. But what we can do is, try and find out where that particular bid is in the journey. But we've got well over 300 people now who are working on these bids on a national basis. And so if you start off with a grant bid of say 30, 40 organisations, and you're bringing more on board at a later date, you'll need to do that through a separate grant application. You won't have the delay in that one as you've probably had with the first one, because of the manner in which we've gone about this and had to set this up. We recognise that it's been from conception to operation, it's been a very, very short period of time, and we've had to work on this really, really quickly. We've had to move people from DWP roles right across the country into managing the grant application process. I've had to put leaders into doing that on a national basis. So it's been a massive effort, David, but we are getting there. But I do accept and apologise for the delays that people on this call may have already experienced. But the detail that you've provided me on that one, I think it was from Louise Ward. I think it was Louise. I'm following that one up, David.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So that was the questions we had in advance, and I'm just you can now, we've got plenty of time to answer questions. So if you want to raise your hand, I'm more than happy to let you ask your questions directly, and so either myself or Richard. And Patrick, I was going to mention your name because I can see you in the chat. Patrick Cross. Patrick?
Hello?
Hi, Patrick. Have you got a question?
Hello. I'm sorry, I started talking without unmuting myself. I do apologise. Pat Cross, I'm the Managing Director of Gecko Programmes in Wolverhampton and Birmingham. We're an AEB provider. We used to be a future jobs fund provider as well. So we're very keen to be offering gateway to our fraternity of companies we offer training to, companies that take people on work placement for us. We're not a gateway seeking any employer to join us. But I'm keen to see that the fifth day of the week is not a wasted day, and that we can make a connection with the employers across the whole scheme, not just with Gecko's fraternity, make a connection with employers so that they realise that there is additional funding, whether it's the colleges or local authorities AEB money or Lot 2, Lot 4 with independent training providers, that resource can be accessed and made available to promote that young person's future. How will that happen, please, David?
Yeah, so thanks, Patrick, for that question, because I think it's a really helpful question. And I think that what we've got to do, and I think your point is about how we connect it all together, and it's about how we can promote that offer, alongside that, so that all organisations are aware of what we've got available in terms of AEB. So our AEB offers, like you say, in terms of Lot 2 and Lot 4, our LAs and our colleges. I think there's an element there of what we've got to do is promote that from a combined authority perspective. So that offer is really clear, but also it's that element for us of, and part of today is to get line of sight of those gateway organisations who are out there, alongside those employers working with DWP for the other who have applied over 30, so that we can better connect that offer, so that those gateway organisations are aware of what is out there in addition, which the employer may find attractive. So we've got a piece of work to do there from a combined authority perspective, and making sure that we're clear in terms of what our AEB providers offers are as well, so that we can neatly promote that offer alongside Kickstart.
Thanks. I believe that's the most valuable thing the combined authority could do for the providers, the intermediaries, and of course the young people.
Great.
It's the most important role.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. I've got a hand up. Jackie Maher, South City College.
Hi, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, great. I'm just looking at the comments box here, and actually Richard has half answered it. I just want some clarity on the question of the 16 to 18-year-olds who aren't on any unemployment credit or universal credit. Are they eligible for this scheme? Is there any clarity on that one?
What they will be eligible for is there are numbers of 16 to 18-year-olds who still get support through universal credit, and that they'll get that indirectly through the family links, remembering that it's a family-wide benefit. And so I think where a young person is in receipt of it indirectly, they will be eligible for it. But I think we'd have to look at each case on its own merit, Jackie.
Okay.
And so I think your point was, those young people accessing the help and support, and potentially the help and support through Kickstart. I think once we've got our youth hub process up and running, and bearing in mind we are still in the early stages of that as well, we're looking at every borough in the Black Country, a good spread across Mercia and Shropshire, and obviously across the whole of Birmingham, that young people, 16-year-olds plus, will be able to access all the help and support they possibly can through that youth hub. So it's not just about people on universal credit, and so we'd be looking at other opportunities for them as well. But there are young people under the age of 18 who are receiving help and support through universal credit, whether it be directly or indirectly, Jackie. So there's no reason why they can't participate in the programme.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nikki made a really good point actually earlier on the sidebar there, David. I've just got it on my screen now, because I think this is something about how Kickstart can potentially support other programs of support. And Nikki says, talking about traineeships, because potentially what we'd see this as a Kickstart as a precursor for somebody moving into something like that, or into an apprenticeship or a sector-based work academy type program, or wider recruitment that's supported through other provision. Kickstart can be an absolute precursor to all of that. So traineeships, apprenticeships particularly, absolutely, there's no reason why they can't.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. There's a couple of questions I've just coming in from Julie Pickering and Noel Dunn. Just to answer those, to answer that question, what we've done at the outset, and just so everyone can know what the question is, Julie's asked a question about what's currently available on the West Midlands Combined Authority website. At present, it says that on our website we've got referral points to our local authorities and chambers. That was our first stage of engagement in Kickstart, so that we could actually promote to our employers on the back of the launch on the 2nd of November. Going forward, we're wanting to use this platform we're creating now through reaching out and engaging with you to get an idea of what your offers are actually going to be. And at the end of this, I'm going to talk through the next steps, but there will be an evaluation piece of activity, which we'll use to capture what your offer is actually going to be as a gateway organisation, and then how we can actually work with you to enable us to actually then promote your offer and promote you on our, potentially through some form of kite marks to say that West Midlands Combined Authority approve you as a gateway, as in terms of how we want to manage our referrals going out. So certainly, Julie, it's something for us that we want to work with as many gateway organisations as possible to enable us to promote your offer. But what we don't want to create is a bit of a free-for-all, because we are mindful that a lot of organisations have thrown their hat into the ring. And what we're wanting to do is to make sure that the offer which we've got available is of good quality. And I'm sure you'll be able to reflect that in the evaluation exercise afterwards, so we can move that forward. And that'll be the same again, Noel, in terms of that level of detail, which you can share with us. So we've got a good idea about what it is you're delivering, and how we can also promote it, but also how we can then work with colleagues in DWP to smooth out some of these issues which we're experiencing. Because again, if we can collaborate, coordinate this activity on the ground, it makes it easier for us to move things along and move things forward with our colleagues in DWP. Just mindful of, there's quite a bit in chat, and I'm mindful that Richard, I think you've answered some of the questions. If your question hasn't been answered, can you raise your hand and I will come to you? Helen Hale.
We have just done.
Hiya, I'm really sorry. My husband's having a meeting next to me as well, so sorry if there's any cross noise.
Okay.
Bit of a nightmare working from home. Yeah. The question that I had was regarding the youth hubs and when there's an expectation for them to be open in local areas. I think some people have got very similar questions about 16 to 18-year-olds who are not on universal credit, and I asked whether the, I suppose, solution was to have them referred into the youth hubs or for the youth job coaches if they're not claiming. But as they're not up and running yet, I just wondered if we got any sort of idea.
I think Helen, what I'll do, because one or two people have raised questions on that now, and I think Jane from Warsaw's also raised a question about traineeships as well. Let me take away the 16 to 18-year-old issue generally, both from a youth hub point of view and from a Kickstart perspective, and I'll get an answer on those back through David, if that's okay.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
I think to answer the other bit of your question about youth hubs generally, Helen, I think what's happened, we've got, whereabouts are you? Where are you based?
So I'm from Dudley College, and we were approached potentially to have a youth hub from our skills centre over in Merry Hill. So the skills shop, if anybody's familiar with it. I know that we were approached to use that, and I think at the moment, I don't know where we are, but I know there's talk of expansion on that. So I don't know where that is, or if it's still a possibility of that being used. Right,
we're delivering from there at the moment. We are delivering some programs from there at the moment, albeit on a virtual basis. Yeah. But yes, we are looking to expand. I think the skills shop in Merry Hill was a starting point for us, Helen. Mm-hmm. It's by no means big enough for us, bearing in mind the numbers of people in and around the Dudley area. So we are looking to expand that out. So in other parts of the Black Country, for instance, we're looking at using the Way in Wolverhampton. We've already got a youth hub established through Sandwell College in West Bromwich. And we're also looking at locations in Walsall as well. So there will be a good spread. I think the problems with the current restrictions that we've got because of the pandemic have meant it's been very a staggered start, and it's been very stop-start, if I'm honest, and that's nobody's fault. And so we're having to make sure that whatever partners we work with in a youth hub way, that we've got a digital solution to enable that to happen as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very
I think
much.
the long term going forward is situations and places where young people can go and they get that real partnership experience with DWP and organisations like yourself who come together, and that's the real ethos of the Youth Hub approach, and that's what we want.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
Susie Branch.
Hello, sorry, on mute. It's going on my gravestone. Just wanted to check if you'd got a client who was looking at being a main gateway, so they're looking to having 30 vacancies or 30 opportunities, assuming that they can roll those, so they don't need to be offering all 30 at the same time. Correct.
And Susie, what that's all about is purely about the lifetime of Kickstart. So as long as an organisation could bring those opportunities to bear before December 2021, that's absolutely fine. That's one of the checks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Sorry, didn't introduce myself. Susie from Birmingham Metropolitan College. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. I think what most gateways are doing at the moment is they're putting their applications in batches, and that seems to be an absolutely sensible thing to do at the moment because of the delays that we've had in the system. So they're putting them in batches of 30 or 40 if they're a gateway organisation with that many employers. So if you've got more to bring to market, then we would suggest you do that in that sort of batch approach. But as we move forward, I don't think we will be experiencing these delays. And although these things may not get done in real time, you won't be seeing a 4-week delay in getting a response to your applications. It'll be much quicker than that, Susie.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions from Jane Cargill, Walsall. Can EB funding be used outside of 25 hours paid work? So EB, Jane, can be used alongside Kickstart, and certainly that's the element in terms of that extra day. So we want to ensure that that we can use that extra day to enable the individual to develop further skills. I'd expect that it's aligned to the job role or potential job role and their aspirations, probably level 2 or level 3 potential qualification.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and I think some of the earlier questions about the traineeship model and how that might be used to complement, and also swaps as well, because there might be other opportunities as someone comes to the tail end of their Kickstart placement that they might want to participate if there isn't a job with the Kickstart host employer.
Yeah. We'd absolutely encourage that, Jane, because that the whole thing about swaps is they are, can't use the word permanent vacancies, but they're permanent as permanent can be in this day and age. But they are jobs that have been created because there's a demand in the labour market for them. Kickstart is a little bit different because they're additional posts that perhaps otherwise wouldn't have been there. So the whole link from Kickstart into swaps is a real tangible one, and one that we would absolutely encourage.
Thanks. Yeah, I think as much flexibility as possible, I think, is required with Kickstart, because I think we need to just recognise that not all the employers will have an end job after the Kickstart placement. We know from previous models that whilst sustainability was good, it definitely wasn't 100%. So I think as much as we can to bolt on additional provision is great.
And I don't think, Jane, in the current climate that we're in, is that's expected, to be honest with you. I think there's no, it's nice if the individual stayed, but there's no expectation on the employer to retain those people, which is why there's a focus on the employability element of all this, in terms of creating a person through the Kickstart placement that's better to meet the labour market as they come out of the other end. But landing that person into something else is equally as important for me if there's no longevity to the Kickstart post.
Thanks both. Thank you.
Thank you. Noel Dunn.
Sorry, problems with mute. Can a Kickstart gateway include their own Kickstart job placements in their application?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. That's all I needed, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we've seen evidence of that already, because it's understood that, you know, particularly some of the larger organisations who are offering a sort of hybrid, that's absolutely fine. I think what some organisations have done, and this is only stuff that I've picked up through the national team, is that if an organisation has 30 plus jobs within itself, they're also a gateway organisation. They might choose to put a bid in separately for those to keep them absolutely separate. So you might put a bid in as an employer in your own right with 30 plus vacancies, plus another grant bid for the employers that you're working with, Noel, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. No, that's really clear. Thanks, Richard.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, Noel. I'm just looking into other questions. I think we've got one. Let's have a look. Any other hands up? Right, I can just see a question from Graham Taylor. For AEB funding activity, will this be ring-fenced to 19 to 24-year-olds only? Our AEB is adult education budget, so it's available for all adults over the age of 19. So in theory, those AEB young people who will Kickstart will be in scope of AEB in terms of Lot 2 and Lot 4 if you're a contract for services provider, and if you're a local authority or a college or grant working on the grant, then you'll be able to use your grant funding to support those young people. We don't necessarily ring fence elements of it unless you're under a contract for services contract, and elements such as that ring fence on the basis of either for unemployed or for adults employed, and then by sector. Another hand I can just see up. Claire, code for your future.
Hi David, thank you very much. My question is, someone shared a link in the chat earlier around to the WMCA website for the Kickstart scheme, and there's a list there of local authorities, chambers of commerce who are currently gateways, and I very much imagine that this will grow in the coming weeks and months. I'm just wondering if we had a role and we were to go through a gateway, is there any kind of like location ties? Would we have to, would say if the role was based in Birmingham, would we have to go through Birmingham City Council, for instance, or if it was remote? Is there? I'm trying to work out which gateway may be best for us.
Okay. I'll try and answer that question, Claire, because I think that the important thing to recognise is what happened with the gov.uk Kickstart site is that as intermediaries, keep calling them intermediaries himself, David, as these gateways started to develop, as DWP moved those organisations through the checking process, they landed up on the website. In order for employers to affiliate themselves with a particular gateway organisation. So to answer your question, if you were an organisation in Birmingham, then yes, ideally you'd perhaps want to link up with a gateway organisation in Birmingham. What you won't see on there is perhaps the breadth of gateway organisations that will eventually find their way onto that site and maybe more appropriate to the type of vacancies that you might have as an employer. I think the initial idea behind having all of those links was to enable smaller employers to participate in the programme. There's no legal obligation for you to go with a Birmingham employer or a Birmingham gateway. There may be other organisations, there may be trade bodies, for example, who are setting themselves up as gateway organisations who you might want to affiliate with. in the fullness of time. You know, that's up to you as an organisation. Once that list is matured, and we've got, you know, real focus on geography within all of that, I think that decision will be made a lot easier for you as an employer. At the moment, it's these are the gateways effectively that have got through that initial round of checking and are now presenting DWP with employers, which is why you've been invited to link yourself up with the gateway organisation. But I do accept that there's no science involved in that at the moment.
Thanks, Richard. That clarifies. Just as a quick follow-up, are you aware of any kind of website or portal or something which would have a more comprehensive list of gateways that are currently operating?
No, that should provide you in as it becomes more mature. That's where the details will be, Claire.
Understood.
Unless DWP make a decision nationally that they're going to put that gateway list somewhere else, because as I said earlier, depending on the sector you operate in, you might want to affiliate yourself with particular gateways for particular reasons, because you might understand that sector a little bit better. I mean, the hope is for most gateways, you're becoming a gateway organisation because you've already got strong links and strong relationships with particular employers, because you've worked with them for potentially many years, and that's fine as well.
Great, thank you.
That helps anyway.
It does, yeah, thank you.
Great. Just moving on, Patrick Cross. Pat, you've got your hand up again. Is that an old hand or is it a new question?
I did ask another question, a second question, but it was to Richard. I'd asked in the message board about the agility of the gateway contracts, and you've already given an answer. If there are new employers, if there are new jobs, it needs to be a fresh application. But it's about the agility within the contract. Say a contract for 200 jobs with 50 employers. One of those employers says, because of the way COVID's developed, I can only take one job rather than 4 jobs. Can those remaining 3 jobs be allocated to an employer who is responding more successfully within COVID?
The answer to that, Patrick, would be a definite yes. I just think what we haven't got at the moment is that nuance that would allow you to do that with DWP. I think where we are at the sort of beginning of all of this, I think there's a recognition now that there has to be a greater level of flexibility that would allow an employer or a gateway organisation to do exactly what you've just said. But at the moment, the route to market is through the DWP contracts team, who would have to tick that box. But you know what, Patrick, if you'd like to drop that question to through David, I'm more than happy to take that up the line, because I think it's a really useful. I'm sure other people would be thinking of that, and that's this flexibility around the COVID resilience of some employers that maybe you want to bring out, and the fact that some employers may be able to bring more and some less, because you start off with this list of maybe 30 or 40 employers who are saying at this point I can offer this, but that changes because COVID changes, restrictions change, lockdown changes, all of that. So please make a note of that through David, and I'll take that up the line for you, Patrick.
Thanks, Richard. I'll certainly send that email to David this morning.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you for that, Richard. Thanks for the question, Pat. Question, Richard, just Martin Matthews, before I go back out to the raised hands. Will DWP work coaches also be offering in-work support whilst on placement to link to the in-person swaps, wider vacancy opportunities, so we don't miss out? How would that in-work piece operate?
I think from our point of view, I think we want people to get the very best out of the work placement. So because it's work, we won't be offering a swap opportunity whilst they're on that work placement. I think the whole idea behind all of this is to make sure that these people are in a work situation. They're being paid a wage, they're paying tax and national insurance. We want them to benefit from the longevity of that opportunity. I think the important thing for us as DWP is to focus on what happens afterwards. That is absolutely key for me here. What we are looking to do is to develop something at the front end of this to support people into the job and to make sure they stay in the job, because I think that's another issue altogether with young people, about making sure that they start the job, are comfortable in the job to get the very best out of it. So we're looking to put more support in at the front end. I think the £1,500 and any help and support that organisations on this call today can bring to bear with supporting people from a skills point of view through the life of that Kickstart job, I think is key.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Just moving back to the hands up, virtual hands. Amanda Wood.
Hi, thanks, David. Yes, Amanda from the Printers Trust. We're still, as an organisation, as you've mentioned, it's quite complicated and it's been quite a changing picture, working out the best way to support this. And nationally, we may well go as a gateway provider. But mine was more down to, I think Richard's touched on it, that local support and how we kind of ensure that the gateways have that check-in facility and are providing the skills logs for young people, so that we're really making the most of that 1,500, and how that might be kind of brought together through like the website, and how we link to make sure that we've got that wraparound support for young people.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think how we move people into these jobs and how we get young people to stay in the jobs and then take part in upskilling and employability during the life of the program is really important. I think we have to make sure that we get that right, Amanda. I think that one thing we haven't perhaps touched on this call so far is how people get into these jobs, and because one or two of our local authorities, when David and I have had a discussion around this, have been talking about the route to the employer through the gateway. So if you're a gateway organisation, you may choose to act as a broker, I suppose, for the employer. And so you'd need to talk with the employer about how they want that young person to get to that particular employer, because we want to work with you to make sure that we've got this right. So the young person who goes to that employer through the work coach is getting the best job that they possibly can out of this. Is it the right job? What are the barriers? What are the issues that they're facing? And so we work together with you as a gateway organisation to make sure that's happening. And so how we hold the hands of those young people through the referral process into you or the employer, I think is really important. And I think as you get established as gateways and employers, your discussions with our local contacts within West Midlands are going to be really important.
Yeah, I think just to add on that point, Richard, I think it's the point you made earlier about, I suppose, maturity in the system, and as things evolve, there's going to be elements of some gateway organisations deselect themselves from the process. I think part of that is certainly in terms of the grant agreements now being published, where that's potentially going to be changing certain behaviours in terms of how those gateways will operate, and for them, that model potentially, and the models which I've just talked about in terms of what good looks like, they might not be able to deliver or have the capacity or capability to deliver. So I suspect there's a lot of water still to go under the bridge in terms of those gateway organisations, some of which will deselect themselves out, but also how they then improve their offer on the ground, and picking up some of the points which Amanda sort of mentioned there.
And if anybody does want to talk to us further about that as the water goes under the bridge, obviously we're here. I don't know whether we're sharing details after the call.
I think, well, certainly in terms of I can't remember in terms of when people were invited, if they were invited to share their details or not. If they were, just mindful of the data rules. But if everyone's ticked that box, then I'm happy to share those details, Amanda. So
brilliant, thank you.
Just a question, just look at other hands who have been waiting patiently. Claire Peake.
Hi, can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Right, lovely. My name's Claire Peake. I'm from South Staffs College. It was just moving on from that the gateway question, just of if employers are using a gateway, and obviously we're delivering sort of wraparound support for these these work placements. How is that being monitored, and do employers have a choice of what organisations they'll use? But how are we monitoring the quality, or are the gateway providers sort of tuning into one main sort of training provider college? So it's more how we managing that quality of that training.
It's an interesting one, Richard. I'm just mindful of the first bit aspect is the spotlight check. What we're doing from a gateway.
I suppose within that, Claire, that the spotlight check will focus on how young people are going to be supported through the process, and everyone is going to be different, and you know, I could try and get really scientific about all of this, but there's no science there with it. The gateway check, as far as DWP is concerned, is you need to satisfy DWP that the customer is going to be in a better position at the end of the placement to move into the world of work, and you just need to state the sort of things that you're either going to do as a gateway organisation through the employer, or that you will make sure that the employer's doing that. Because again, something that we haven't touched on, I suppose, is how that £1,500 is potentially used, and I think something that we found out right at the beginning when we started getting asked the questions is that the agreement of how that £1,500 is used is purely between the gateway and the employer. Essentially, that's the employer's funding, and you as a gateway organisation would have to be sure if they're getting all of that £1,500, if they're choosing to take all of that you would be talking to them about, okay, so what are you actually doing, and what's my quality check as a gateway organisation on that particular employer. I think a lot of gateway organisations are also getting into the thought of, okay, so I can offer you, the employer, that service in recompense for that, a portion of that or all of that £1,500. That's not something DWP are getting involved in. That's a discussion between the gateway organisation and the employer, and I'm sure that's something that most people on this call have probably thought about at some point.
My concern is really if you've got so many wraparound service providers, colleges, training providers with one gateway, how is that gateway going to know what's best for that employer? Does that make sense?
I think that's why, you know, David said right at the beginning of this about, you know, being a gateway organisation won't be for everybody, because it's not straightforward. It's not a straightforward role, because, you know, you've got to make sure that, you know, the placement that's being offered through whatever employer it might be is going to get the best level of support. And that's by prior arrangement between you as the gateway organisation and the employer. So that might look, so if you've got a gateway bid for 30 different employers, there's 30 different discussions to potentially have, because you could potentially have 30 different sectors, and so that discussion is going to be different for every single employer. That's why the gateway approach may not be for absolutely everybody, but I think as adult education providers, I would imagine most of the organisations on this call today would have a a fairly high degree of flexibility to make that work for them. But it is down to the negotiation on what we're going to be doing with that young person from a skills employability point of view during the life of the programme.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And just to add, it's certainly not lost on us at the Combined Authority on that element about quality of the gateways, and those who've joined recently. Part of our approach going forward, certainly in terms of a point of entry for any organisation see the West Midlands Combined Authority can promote, we'll be certainly wanting to have a closer look in terms of what we would call their minimum service offering. So probably a little bit aligned to some of the stuff I've talked about earlier in terms of what good looks like, so that it's really clear in terms of what it is that moves and what it is they have available to move people on. And that other key point, which Richard's sort of saying as well, is that it's the obligations as well, which the employers are also signing up to alongside the gateway, ensuring that those outputs are actually delivered, and that they work with a gateway organisation who's going to deliver those outputs for them if they choose to work with them. Just moving on in terms of another question, Paul Dose has asked a question, Richard, in terms of how will the work coaches link to the appropriate gateway? So I suppose it's that element of how does what's the journey from a young person's perspective? So when they work with a work coach, how will that work coach then work with the young person and potentially refer them into the job roles?
Okay, so what will happen is I've been around this department long enough to have, when we used to have a really robust vacancy handling system, where vacancy staff used to take jobs from employers, put them onto the system, and we used to refer to them. And I even go back long enough to know them that there were cards on the boards in job centres. And obviously, that was a long time ago. However, what we're doing for this particular exercise is loading those vacancies will be loaded through the Universal Credit Build by DWP. So when your employers are ready to go, you basically notify our team, our DWP team, of who that vacancy is with, what the referral arrangements are. Do you want to be the halfway house in terms of getting that young person to the employer through your gateway, or is it direct to the employer? So all the referral arrangements get dropped into the hopper. They come through the Universal Credit Build, and the work coach sees the opportunity on the screen. That's the important bit that we have to absolutely get right. So the referral mechanism, the route to market for all of that needs to be expressly discussed beforehand. I think the reason that we've tried to make sure that we've got a Kickstart senior lead within each district is because we know this is going to be huge. And so what we clearly want to do with all of this is to make sure that as gateways develop in particular districts, that you start to build relationships with your Kickstart leads within those districts within DWP. It won't be as I suppose it won't be as robust as a vacancy management system that we perhaps used to have in the past. But the important thing is that you perhaps have a discussion right up front with how you want these young people to get to that particular employer. And I think from our point of view, we want to make sure that we get the right quality for all of this. Although a lot of these young people will have with them some baggage in terms of why they perhaps couldn't hold down a permanent job at the moment, which is why Kickstart is a real halfway house for them. That's fine. We just need to make sure that the right people are getting through to the employers or through yourselves. And I think there's also something here about managing employers' expectations, and I'm sure you've had to do that as training providers in the past. We have to do it all the time with employers because of the type of people that are going to potentially be referred to them. So these aren't necessarily always going to be absolutely job ready, nailed on individuals for these employers. We're going to have to do some work with these young people, and that's the whole idea behind Kickstart. So there's all that relationship management for me at the front end with you as Gateway and employers, with our district people and our work coaches who are very, very new to this. We've been running this for 2 weeks, remember, and so we're very mindful that we need to get that quality aspect of our service right, and we'll be working hard with you, you know, to make sure that that happens. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and thanks all for that Q&A. I think we're numbers have stayed relatively high. I think a number of people have now left the conversation, but we're still around about 74, which is great. Just really, I suppose now there's no more hands and I can't see any other questions popping in. So apologies if I missed your question in the chat function, but yeah, if you do want to email us your question, I'm sure we can get it answered for you. Just in terms of next steps, then, I just want to move on to the sort of final slide in terms of what we're going to be doing. So what we're on with at the moment is we're trying to evaluate the level of capacity we've got in region. When I talked earlier about the potential targets in terms of numbers of 20,000 Kickstart placements, it's have we got sufficient capacity to be able to deliver that? You know, and that's a key question we've got to ask the marketplace in terms of that kind of quantum. So off the back of today, you'll all be receiving an evaluation form to complete, but also asking some other information in terms of what does your Kickstart offer actually look like in terms of a minimum service, and if you want to be working with us going forward. If you can complete that evaluation piece, that'd be really helpful for us, so we can look at what you're offering, and then potentially come back to you in terms of working with you going forward. So a big piece of work there about evaluating capacity. Second element is around data and reporting. As I've talked about, it's really important for us to get underneath the big numbers and how potentially what looks like a sensible sorts of targets with milestones we can set ourselves to ensure that we're having an impact in our work, both at a local authority district level, but also as a wider combined authority piece. So that's quite important. And how we share information between gateways and whole data sharing piece will be quite important around that. Appreciate some of that will be difficult with GDPR, but what can we actually achieve in that space? Also, in terms of the comms communications plan, we want us to be able to share our comms strategy with gateway organisations to understand the branding, getting off the back of that comms piece in terms of sharing good news stories, good practice, so that we can continue to promote Kickstart through the longevity of the programme. Initially, we know that Kickstart is going to be running up until or new starts up until the 21st of December 2021, which will mean that the final Kickstart individuals will leave in June 2022. But we want to put in place a sustainable common strategy to continue to keep Kickstart at the front of people's minds, alongside programs such as apprenticeships and traineeships and swaps. So common strategy is going to be really important. And then finally, that plan of action and that plan of activity will have a range of themes, one of which will be a theme around capacity and engagement with gateways. And I'm wanting to potentially sort of build on how we engage with you as gateways going forward. And that could well be off the back of similar webinars such as this, and how we manage the frequency of that so that we can continually share information to use organisations who are providing now that as a gateway, but also that wraparound service. So I think what I can do now is I think I can end this webinar. Thank you, Richard, for your contributions today. I appreciate you being front and centre to a lot of this, but your contributions have been really invaluable, and your support throughout Kickstart to the Combined Authority has been really, really valuable, and obviously to members of the local authorities who you're already engaging with. I'd like to thank you all, the wider group, everyone who's come forward, have asked you questions. Again, I want to keep the dialogue open, so that if you've got any questions, please raise them with the Combined Authority, and we will endeavour to come back to you as soon as we can. But I'd like to now end this and probably give us all some time off for good behaviour, 20 minutes before time. So thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.